So I have a supremely unique challenge. How do you make the discussion of mortality, aging, longevity, and death fun and interesting? So it's really not all that easy. So I'll do my best. It actually is far more interesting than you could possibly imagine. And I'm going to challenge some of your conventional views about longevity and aging and where we're headed. And I'll really challenge some of the language that we heard earlier today about some of these issues. I'm actually going to lay it all out on the line with my first slide. I'm just going to really tell you everything that I want to tell you. And then what I have to do is, it's a very complicated idea, this concept of a longevity dividend. So I'm going to actually let many of the major scientists explain to you what this is all about when I get to the end, when I show you this video. But between now and then, I actually have to explain to you how we got to where we are, why we live as long as we do now. It's absolutely critical to understand that first in order to figure out why it is that we're doing this, why it is that we're pursuing this concept of a longevity dividend. I'll get to this image in a minute. So here's the entire line of reasoning. And look, my language is going to be unambiguous. You didn't invite me here to lie to you, so I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to be completely frank and honest. You may not like some of what I have to say, and I won't be apologetic for that. That's the way things are in terms of human aging and longevity. So number one, our fate as an aging species is set in stone. There's no stopping aging. There's no reversing aging anytime soon. I'm sorry. I wish we had the ability to do that. Right now, we can't. Stopping or reversing aging really isn't in the cards. Maybe slowing it down is. That's really what the longevity dividend is all about. And ultimately, I'm going to argue that's what you should all be interested in. Diseases that appear later in life are fundamentally linked to biological aging. Keep in mind, the longer we live, the greater the force of biological aging influencing the diseases that are expressed at later ages. So, you know, by the time I'm done here, there should be a light bulb that turns on in your head that says, now I understand the difference between aging and disease, because you really need to distinguish between them. There's a lot that we can do about disease. Right now, whenever we influence disease, we're not influencing aging. So keep in mind this fundamental distinction between them. Approaches to diseases right now are to attack them one at a time. Actually, is there any way to move that over so that the whole picture is on the screen? If somebody else can't do it, I will, but it's really, I think somebody just needs to roll that thing a little bit. There we go. See, science at its best. So our approach to diseases is to attack them one at a time. This is the modern medical approach. We somehow assume that heart disease, cancer, stroke, Alzheimer's, that these are all independent of each other. We have institutes that are devoted to treat each of these, to go after each of these diseases. And I'm going to make the case that no, that's not true. Actually, there's a fundamental underlying risk factor for them all, and it's aging. And the time has arisen for us to go after the biological process itself. I will argue that this current approach to disease will yield diminishing gains in longevity and health. And in fact, I will go so far as to say that the current disease model, attacking one disease at a time, will ultimately lead to increases in frailty and disability. It'll make us older longer. So while a cure for cancer sounds great, and I'd like to see it happen, what I can assure you is that if we succeed in curing cancer or heart disease, that the saved population will live long enough to get something else, and you won't like that something else. Human body design is fixed. There are inherent limits. I'll get to this issue with some interesting imagery. We now have the capacity to take control over our own biological destiny. You heard the previous talk dealing with some of these issues. This is fascinating science going on, and we're just scratching the surface, and you're going to hear a couple of more talks later today that really get into additional detail about dealing with our own biological destiny. And I will argue we are on the verge of a breakthrough, or a series of breakthroughs that have the potential to modulate the rate of aging and alter the way in which we grow old. Keep in mind, we should not be using the phrase immortality at all. I heard this earlier this morning. I heard it yesterday a little bit. My friend Aubrey talks about it all the time, Aubrey DeGray. And it is complete nonsense. We really shouldn't even be, it should not be part of scientific discourse as far as I'm concerned. And I will show you why it is that this concept of radical life extension, people who make up numbers of 120 or 150, we shouldn't be talking about that either. It's not going to happen, and I'm going to show you exactly why that is the case. All right, so here's some of the background material that I have to provide to you. It's some basic biology and some basic evolution, but it's all really straightforward and simple. So this looks like a really boring line, right? It's just a line. But actually, as it turns out, this was one of the most important lines ever discovered about human aging and longevity. This is on the x-axis is age, and on the vertical axis is the death rate. It's on a semi-log scale, which means when you see a straight line, it means there's an exponential increase with the passage of time. Benjamin Gompertz, an actuary, discovered this in 1825. So what did he discover? He discovered the longer we live, the higher the probability we're going to die, right? So, it sounds obvious to us today, but it really wasn't obvious to a working actuary in 1825 who needed to work out the mathematics of how you're paying out annuities and stuff like that. So it actually was an absolutely critical discovery. Now, keep in mind what you don't see here. What you don't see is that this curve doesn't go straight and it doesn't go down. It goes up with the passage of time. Now, keep that in mind because this actually is highly relevant. Now, don't bother reading these words. I'm just going to tell you the language that Gompertz used in 1825 is actually important. The conclusion that he came to in 1825 when he saw this pattern of mortality, and that's sort of the way in which I'll describe it. It was a consistent pattern of death. High early age mortality, declining to its lowest point, always at puberty. I'll show you a picture of this in a minute, and then rising exponentially thereafter. No matter what human population he looked at, no matter where in the world, no matter what time period, the curve always looked exactly the same. He thought of this conceptually as a law of mortality, just like the concept of a law of gravity that others had talked about earlier. Newton's law of universal gravitation. He saw this as a law of mortality, that all living things experience an elevated risk of death with the passage of time. So there it is. There's Gompertz's line right there, and this is what death looks like in humans. It's never changed, ever. And there's no reason to believe that this will ever change in the future, at least in any significant way. The very high infant mortality, infant and child mortality, the point of lowest mortality is always at puberty. I'll explain why that's the case later. And then the risk of death rises exponentially thereafter. It looks exactly the same no matter where you go, no matter what population you look at, and guess what? This mortality curve is exactly what it looks. This mortality curve applies to almost all sexually reproducing species. So it applies to mice, to dogs, to elephants, to a whole suite of species. The curve looks exactly the same. Gompertz was right. There is a law of mortality, and we have to recognize the fact that there is a fundamental attribute of living things that takes us away with the passage of time. So, Carl Pearson in 1897, you might recognize that name, by the way. That's Pearson from Pearson correlation, for those of you who've taken a statistics course, commissioned an image to convey this concept of mortality. These skeletons represent what we refer to as the force of mortality or the force of death. And these individuals here represent people in different phases of the lifespan. So what you see here is an infant about to get bashed over the head by the force of mortality, implying very high infant death rates. You see the use of a Gatling gun, a very effective way of killing. For children, the least effective method of killing would be a bow and arrow for individuals who've just begun to reach their reproductive ages, and then the use of a musket for people at middle ages, and you could see the force of mortality picking people off with a rifle at very old ages. Now this is called the bridge of life, but it's really anything but the bridge of life, as you can see. And there's a couple of interesting messages in here. What do you see here? You're not crossing over, I'm sorry. So this was Pearson's message that there's a limited duration of life, and we have to recognize the fact that there's a biological force at work here. And there's another message that I think Pearson was trying to get across. If you notice, the force of mortality is looking at its target in every instance but here. Now, why is the force of mortality not even bothering?
Because he knows he's going to fall off.
Exactly, he knows he's going to fall off. So you can pick him off with heart disease, cancer, stroke, a wide variety of diseases, but guess what? You could put the gun down because if an individual is not taken out by one of these major fatal diseases, aging will. Recognize the difference between aging and disease. If you succeed in reducing the risk of death from major fatal diseases, the individual lives a little bit longer, only to get something else. These are, I mean, it's not like we don't know this, right? There's a wide variety of diseases and disorders that cluster in human bodies at older ages. So I added this back in after the talk this morning because I wanted to alert you to something that, look, it's not like this hasn't been known for a long time. I published this in Science in 1990, so we've known about this for a quarter century. Life expectancy at birth is on the x-axis. The percentage reduction in death rates required to achieve much higher life expectancies is on the vertical axis. Look, this is really simple. In order to get, this is really an answer to the question, how much do death rates have to decline in order to get much higher life expectancies? To get a life expectancy of 100, you simply go all the way up to the top where it crosses one of those lines and you move over to the left, and that tells you that to get a life expectancy of 100, death rates have to decline at every age from all causes by 85%. So you might say, well, why not? Why can't we reduce death rates by 85% at all ages? Well, guess what? If you hypothetically eliminate cancer from the population, you only achieve about a 3-year increase in life expectancy. You only get 3 years by eliminating cancer. Can anybody tell me why it is that we only get 3 years from eliminating cancer? Other stuff. That's probably a better answer than I could have given. Other stuff. Heart disease. The elimination of ischemic heart disease, actually all cardiovascular diseases, at the time I wrote this, would have yielded about a 10-year increase in life expectancy. It's now about 4.5 years because the risk of death from cardiovascular disease has gone down. If you remove all major fatal diseases, heart disease, cancer, stroke, Alzheimer's, we would live about roughly 85 to 90 years. Why aren't we immortal? If you eliminate the diseases that kill us today? I'm looking for a one-word answer. Aging, thank you very much. Aging is unaltered by going after these major fatal diseases. We are not going to get a life expectancy of 100 anytime soon. We should not be using 120. We should not be making up numbers. This is science. This is not science fiction. Unfortunately, there's a lot of science fiction out there. You may have seen it in Time magazine in early March and Business Week. In late March, where Time magazine had 142, Business Week had 173. I guarantee you these are all made up numbers. There's no science behind them. They don't understand how life tables are generated. Look, here's another way of looking at it. Life expectancy at birth is on the x-axis. This is the percentage reduction in death rates at all ages required to get life expectancy to rise by 1 year. So we published this in Science in 2001, right? There's another simple line. Simple is good as far as I'm concerned. So what's the message here? The message is that when life expectancy is 50, in order to get to 51, you have to reduce death rates by about 4.5% at all ages. But in order to get life expectancy to rise from 80 to 81, you have to reduce death rates by 9.5% at every age. What's the message here? The higher life expectancy rises, the more difficult it becomes to increase it further. This is called entropy in the life table, and there's no ambiguity here. There's no arguing with the statistics of longevity and mortality. This is the way things work. So we are not going to get a life expectancy of 100 anytime soon. 120 is simply out of the question. And I'm actually going to show you an image a little bit later on why it is that this is the case. All right, let me give you a dose of biology here, because this dose of biology is absolutely critical to understanding why we live as long as we do. And I'm going to invoke Theodosius Dobzhansky's line from many years ago: nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution. Nothing in aging makes sense except in the light of evolution. If you don't understand evolution, none of this makes sense at all. I'm going to give you a really quick dose of this, but I like using this picture to illustrate sort of the main point that I'm trying to make. And I actually published a paper on this very topic where I said both Michelangelo and Darwin were right. Michelangelo was talking about the perfection of the human body, and in a way it is. It's pretty darn close. When you consider the number of cells that we have and the amount of damage that accumulates in our cells and tissues and organs with the passage of time. I don't even know how we make it to 100, quite frankly, given all the repair that has to go on. But Darwin was also right when he talked about flaws in the human body, and I'm going to show you some examples of that in a minute. But let me start out by illustrating or answering this basic question: why do we live as long as we do? Now, I actually like to use images from my own family. So this is my daughter, my wife, her mother, and my grandson, who is actually now a year old. And why aren't we talking about a grandfather hypothesis, by the way? Why is it always the grandmother hypothesis? And here's a picture of my son and my father when he was in his early 70s. And this is me just from a couple of years ago, as you can see. Now, the question is, why do we transition from this to this over a prescribed time period? Why does it take 70, 80, 90 years? Why isn't it 150? Or why isn't it 20? Why is it what it is? By the way, I have this picture up here to illustrate that during the quarter century from here to here, he was on cruise control. And there was no change really in him at all, physically, mentally, up to 96, frankly. Pretty remarkable. But you could see what happened to me and my son. We went through some rather rapid developmental changes. I'm going to pass by this because somebody talked about it yesterday. These are the evolutionary theories of senescence. And I want to show you this image. This actually is one of two important images that I'm going to show you. Because this helps us understand and explain why it is that the mortality curve looks the way it does. So what I've done, forget about the words for the moment, what I've done is I've divided the lifespan into three regions: the pre-reproductive region, the reproductive region, and the post-reproductive region of the lifespan. I've made it really simple. What my colleagues and I have done, and we published extensively on this, is that we've documented the linkage between the onset and length of the reproductive window and duration of life. So let me be clear. Duration of life of humans and other sexually reproducing species is calibrated to reproduction. The onset and length of the reproductive window defines how long we live. This applies across species, and it applies within species. So for example, females, human females that go through natural menopause late tend to live much longer than women who go through natural menopause early. As you might imagine, this would be of interest to insurance companies. So what's the message here? As soon as we begin reproducing, as soon as we begin passing our genes on to the next generation, the ability of natural selection to influence gene frequencies begins to decline until it reaches zero or close to zero in the post-reproductive region of the lifespan. This is good news, actually. This is the reason why it is. Well, let me back up a second. When the force of natural selection declines to zero or near zero in the post-reproductive region of the lifespan, this is the reason why you cannot have death genes or aging genes. There is no programmed aging that is designed specifically for the purpose of taking us out. There's no aging gene, there's no death gene. They cannot exist because evolution could not have given rise to them. This opens the door for us. This is why your treatments can work. This is why interventions that this is why diet and exercise work. This is why interventions that influence the expression of a wide variety of diseases and disorders in this region of the lifespan can be manipulated in our favor. If there was an aging gene or a death gene, we would have to battle against our fundamental genetics. Now keep in mind here, I have argued and would argue that our duration of life, because it's calibrated to the onset and length of the reproductive window, it means that there is no genetic limit to duration of life, genetically based limit to duration of life. That doesn't mean that there aren't limits, and I'll explain why that is the case in a moment. So for example, a mouse goes through puberty at about 30 days, and it lives 1,000. A dog, this was my dog, by the way, they go through puberty at about 9 months. They live about 5,000 days. She lived about 5,200 days. Elephants live about 26,000 days. Humans, we go through puberty at about 11 to 12 years. We live about 29,000 days. It's remarkably accurate, by the way. It's an average, keep in mind. Sea turtles go through puberty at 50 years of age. 50. They reproduce for 100 years. They can live for 150. And a bowhead whale can live for 210 years. It's a mammal. I don't know when they go through puberty and menopause, in case anyone was going to ask. So keep in mind, duration of life is calibrated to the onset and length of the reproductive window. The message I'm trying to get across here is that the reproductive window is a genetically fixed attribute of the species. We are not manipulating growth, development, and reproduction anytime soon, at least in humans. It's been done artificially in some other species, but in humans, we're not manipulating these early life developmental events. In the absence of manipulating those early life developmental events, we have to live with the biology that we were born with. We are not changing that anytime soon. So I was a runner for many, many years, and I can tell you that I tried my best to run a 4-minute mile in my younger days. And the best I could do was the equivalent of a 5.5-minute mile for one lap. Now, I don't have a gene in my body, and nor do you, that says you can't run a mile in 1 minute. There's no gene that's stopping you from doing it, but you can't do it. You can't operate the mechanics of this body such that you could run a mile in a minute, but you can't run a mile in a minute. There is no gene that says we can't be immortal, or we can't live a whole lot longer than we do now. But we can't live a whole lot longer than we do now. There are basic biomechanical constraints. So, communicating this idea is really not an easy thing, I'll be honest with you, because it's one thing to say words, it's another thing to provide an image or series of images. So, in 2001, my colleagues and I published this article in Scientific American entitled "If Humans Were Built to Last." It was republished in 2003, and actually it was just republished again in March of this year. My co-authors are Bruce Carnes, who was at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center, and the late Bob Butler, who was the founding director of the National Institute on Aging. And this was my cue to myself. There was a question that came up from somebody this morning about August Weismann's idea of removing the old to make way for the young. Bob Butler coined the phrase ageism. It must have been, what, a couple of decades ago, I think. And Weismann was wrong in his suggestion that we should be removing the old to make way for the young. And we heard it this morning, this story told to a young child. We should be, I don't know what the language was exactly, but the message was remove the old to make way for the young. Bob would be turning over in his grave if he had heard this line of reasoning. It is ageist, the worst type of ageist argument I have heard in a long time. I will admit that the hair on the back of my neck goes up. When I hear this, I have lots of hair on the back of my neck. I can tell you, just removing people because they're older is a fundamentally flawed line of reasoning. It's a way of devaluing people because of their age. And Bob fought against this for decades, and we need to continue on with this fight, so I had to reiterate this point. Age should not be the variable that's being used to evaluate people. We should not be discarding them, removing people because of their chronological age. Enough said. All right, so we published this article in 2001, and we identified body parts, things that go wrong with the passage of time. This actually, you know how you have an article that you write in your career and you have a favorite one? This was absolutely by far my favorite article that I ever published. So we looked at a lot of the things that go wrong with us, with time, problems with our knee joints, hip joints, muscle mass, cardiovascular system. And we've basically fixed them. You know, you can do anything with pen and paper. This is sort of classic Darwinian thinking here. This crossing of the food and the air passageway in the back of the throat is a really terrible design. What do we have? 10?
That's half an hour.
Half an hour, okay. All right, I'll move very quickly through this because I knew it was going to take me longer than I thought. So let me move quickly through this. We basically redesigned the human body. And so we dealt with sensory impairments and problems with choking, and the fix was pretty simple. We raised the trachea. We increased the size of the outer ear. We used the attachment of the optic nerve to the retina from a squid. And we basically redesigned the body. You might recognize this, by the way. This ear was stolen from us by Avatar. Now, of course, we stole it from Star Trek. So this one was one of my favorite examples of bad body design. You don't run a tube through an organ carrying a liquid that encloses with the passage of time. So we fixed that. My dad was a plumber. And you'd ask my dad about this design, and he would say, this is the work of an apprentice. All right, you piece it all together, and you get an animal that looks like this. We made it shorter, we increased bone density, muscle mass, we tilted the upper torso forward. There's lots of things that we did. This was my dad's idea. Those of us from the Midwest have basements where we have check valves that influence the flow of liquid going up. It's the same thing in the human body. So we introduced more check valves. There was lots of stories that came out after this article was published. This was the San Francisco Chronicle. These came out in a paper in Singapore. Rather interesting, to say the least. And then here's the male version of the same thing. Look, don't get me wrong. We weren't arguing here that we can design the human body any better than it is now. Don't misread this. We weren't saying that. What we were saying is that we have to live with the body design that we have. And that body design is flawed. It's only flawed, though, if you live long enough to see a wide variety of diseases and disorders expressed at older ages. All right, so I'm going to show you, this actually, believe it or not, is the most important slide I can show you. I've actually given an entire 1-hour talk using this one slide. So I can actually tell you everything you need to know about the past, the present, and the future of longevity using this one slide. So let me explain. On the x-axis is age. On the vertical axis is the number of deaths. And the way in which you generate a curve like this is you take a hypothetical group of 100,000 babies born in a given year, let's say 1900 or 2010, and you apply the death rates to those 100,000 and you plot the ages at which they would all die. Well, this is the curve in 1900. You see high infant and child mortality. Here's maternal mortality, right here. And then if you lived past the first couple of decades, you had a decent chance of living out 60, 70 80 years. What did we do during the course of the 20th century? We dramatically reduced early age mortality. We shifted death into older regions of the lifespan. Now most death occurs past the age of 65 in long-lived populations. And we've pushed people into this area that I refer to as the red zone. So this is actually a perfect analogy for somebody from Chicago, because if you follow the Chicago Bears, when the Bears make it into the, if they ever make it into the 20-yard line, they have almost no chance of scoring a touchdown. So the closer you get to the end zone, the harder it becomes to score a touchdown. The closer you push out the envelope of survival, the more difficult it becomes to raise it further. That was the entropy in the life table that I was talking about before. But here's the dilemma. We pushed ourselves out into this region of the lifespan where frailty and disability is extraordinarily high. And you have a number of diseases that cluster into this region of the lifespan. So if you reduce the risk of death from any one disease, something else very rapidly takes over. This is why we will not achieve any sort of radical increase in life expectancy anytime soon. What we will achieve is some compression of this curve more and more into the red zone, and there's not likely to be much movement out at the tail of the distribution because human bodies weren't designed to last that long, just like you can't run a 1-minute mile. All right, so I've now given you the background for why it is that we can only live so long and there's only so much that we can do. The fear that many of us have, those of us working in this field, is that, look, we got what we wished for, right? We got 30 years of additional life during the 20th century. It was a gift, a wonderful gift. It was primarily because we saved the young. But what was the trade-off? The trade-off for those 30 years was heart disease, cancer, stroke, Alzheimer's, and sensory impairments. Fair trade. I would take that. I think everybody here would be willing to, you did take it, actually, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So the question is, what are we trading for now? What situation have we placed ourselves in by living so long? And the situation is that we face a wide variety of diseases and disorders that have clustered together in these aging bodies. And the question is, what do we get next? And that's why I've argued that this one disease at a time approach is going to yield diminishing returns, and in fact may not only yield diminishing returns, it may increase frailty and disability as the risk of death from major fatal diseases declines. So many of us in the field have now argued, look, we have to realize that we're in this very unique scenario, very unique situation, and the time has arrived for us to alter our approach, to not just go after diseases as we have, but instead go after the biological process of aging itself. Now I'm going to pass by a whole bunch of slides, and I just want to take you to some slides here at the end, and then I want to show you a video. I'm going to pass by this. I just don't have time. Did you want to see those images? All right, I'll show you this one. Look, the researchers working in the field don't yet know which intervention is going to allow us to slow aging. You might hear some examples of it this afternoon. It's extraordinarily exciting work that's going on. I have no idea which one is going to hit. Researchers have studied caloric restriction. You know, you do realize that we're not calorically restricting ourselves in long-lived populations, but understanding the mechanics of caloric restriction may enable researchers to create mimetics for CR. Researchers are studying the genetics of long-lived people. I think you're going to hear about that this afternoon. These individuals, this is Jeanne Calmon, by the way, the world's record for longevity. She made it to 122. Interesting fact about her, she smoked for 100 years. That's not a license to smoke, just so you should know. And then researchers are looking for compounds to slow aging. We know that there will be huge benefits if we can generate a a minor deceleration in the rate of aging. We published this in 2013. The first author was Dana Goldman at University of Southern California. This is the number of non-disabled or healthy people that make it out to 65 and over if we continue to reduce the risk of death from cancer and heart disease, which would be good news if we could do that. But if we could slow aging, there will be many, many more healthy people who make it out every year between now and 2060 into older ages. Let me pass by this. I'm going to pass by all this stuff and just get to the bottom line here. I will show you a cartoon, then I want to show you a video. This, if you can't see this, it says, remember the 20 extra years you added to your life through clean, healthy living? Well, these are them. This is the fear that many of us have, that we live a healthy lifestyle and we get to live longer, but the problem is that when we add life, we don't add it at the middle, we don't add it at the beginning, we add it at the end, when you're in the red zone, when frailty and disability is at its highest. So the probability is that if we continue to reduce the risk of death, we can make ourselves more frail for a longer time period. Nobody wants that. What do we all want? We all want the exact same thing. We want health extension. Nobody in aging science is talking about life extension. Well, maybe with the exception of Aubrey. There's a couple of other people that are making up these numbers of 120, 150 or higher. There's no need to exaggerate. There's plenty of aging to go around. It's going to happen. We don't have to make up these high numbers. It's just not necessary. And this is the fear that we have. So what I'm going to show you is a video that will illustrate to you what the current thinking is in the field. And the people here, I'm in it for a little bit, but the people here are some of the leading authorities in the field, and the message is crystal clear. And then I'm going to quit right after that. I can stop it halfway through.
Okay. When I'm 80 years old.
When I'm 90, hopefully when I'm 100
years old.
Be able to interact with
things I always worry about is being dependent on somebody.
Healthy.
I would continue to be engaged and productive.
I hope to become an old, young, active person.
Over the course of human history, most people died before the age of 10, with an exceptional few living into their 60s and 70s. Around 150 years ago, a remarkable shift occurred, and the average length of life began to increase. Every decade, about 2 years were added to average life expectancy. This trend continued in Western Europe and North America until, by the close of the 20th century, life expectancy had doubled for most people in the developed world.
And those additional 30 years of life that we added in the 20th century, we call the first longevity revolution. It was primarily improvements in public health like clean water, sanitation, indoor living and working environments, controlled air temperature. These are all the things that created very harsh conditions for people in the early part of the 20th century. We wanted to live longer. We didn't want our children to die. We succeeded in doing this. And we got exactly what we wished for.
Today, the numbers of people living to old age and to super old age are rising around the globe. To live a long life is a monumental achievement, and longer lifespans are precious gifts for everyone. But there is another side to this story.
50% of the children born now will live naturally to over 100 years. But if we don't increase health span, what it means is that individuals are going to still succumb to cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and neurodegenerative disease at some point between their 40s and their 70s.
Developed nations are spending a growing share of their total wealth trying to hold back a fast-approaching silver tsunami of chronic diseases and disabilities of aging.
Baby boomers who were born post-World War II are now aging into what we sometimes refer to as retirement age. post 65, and we're seeing this in some of our social programs. And the upheaval that that's going to cause to society is tremendous. This is referred to as the silver tsunami. And it should also be said that this is not a phenomenon that's unique to the United States. We're seeing this around the world in many countries.
Escalating costs of healthcare and long-term care for growing populations of older people are driving government spending to new heights. A tide of chronic diseases born of the longevity revolution is what lies at the heart of the European debt crisis, a harbinger of what may await many nations, including the healthcare system of the United States.
One of the major concerns with an aging population is that Medicare costs are spiraling out of control. They're going up by tens of billions of dollars on a yearly basis, and it's threatening to break our federal budgets. Right now, we're spending 19% of our GDP on healthcare, and it's going to keep going up.
We live in a world that's exquisitely designed to support young life, and we need to very quickly develop a culture that supports us all the way through.
As a geriatrician, I have seen people coming into the office, and I think it's an experience that all of my colleagues have experienced, who have multiple things going on, what we call multiple chronic conditions. And all of those things combined make for a real challenge to optimize quality of life and health for that individual, and to manage it in the constraints that are provided in the current medical environment.
Magnified by hundreds of millions of people around the globe, the illnesses and infirmities of old age are a gathering storm of dependency, leading to lower quality of life and towering social burdens. Taking on the bulk of this burden are members of their families, the majority of whom are women.
For families and caregivers of frail older individuals, there are real challenges to quality of life. The individual who's requiring care doesn't have the autonomy and independence that they're accustomed to. The caregivers are often very stressed, and that stress translates into problems with their health, challenges with maintaining employment, challenges with being properly reimbursed. It gets to be a real conundrum.
With age, people face multiple threats at the same time to life and health, which means that even total victory over cancer, cardiovascular disease, or dementia would not extend high quality of life. There is always another disease of aging awaiting to take its place.
Aging is a major risk factor for all the diseases that we are afraid of and we die from. And unless we change the rate of aging, all we're going to hope for is exchange one disease for another. Because the only way to treat all of them, to prevent all of them, is delaying actually the aging.
The questions then become, what can be done to help ensure a longer health span? And what research is most likely to produce innovations for a better future? Scientists, politicians, doctors increasingly agree that that investment must be made in medical research that aims to better understand how the aging of our bodies leads to the diseases that threaten not just our lifespan, but our health span.
We are no genetically hardier than our ancestors were 10,000 years ago. This increase, this dramatic increase in life expectancy came about because of science and technology and wide-scale behavioral changes and social norms that improved the safety of the world in which we live. So science and technology got us here, and now we need to apply science and technology again in order to make sure that these added years of life improve quality of life at all ages, not just in old age, but again, all the way through.
If we invest now in figuring out ways to extend health spans so that these people are still highly functional and they have low healthcare costs, we'll find that it could be a very positive thing, but we have to really invest now into finding ways to keep people healthy longer.
Scientists who study aging are in general agreement that the process isn't set in stone, that the aging process can be sped up by genetics or poor lifestyle choices, but that it can also be slowed down. This means that research that slows aging has the potential to extend healthy years of life and simultaneously postpone the costly and harmful conditions of old age.
So in some sense, we're playing whack-a-mole. You know, you knock out one disease and then people are going to die of another disease or develop another disease. What if we could slow that biological process?
Scientists have found that alterations in cell replacement and repair, stress response, and inflammation are key influencers in the development of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and other debilitating and costly conditions of later life. These are also the essential changes taking place in our aging bodies that lead to loss of strength, changes in vision, arthritic joints, and other declines. But is it really possible to do this? To slow the rate of aging to protect against disease?
We're now coming to realize that aging appears to be a modifiable risk factor, potentially. So we have some reason to be optimistic that in humans we might be able to delay age-related diseases as a group by targeting fundamental aging mechanisms. This would be absolutely transformative. So what was science fiction just a few years back is becoming reality.
Even a marginal delay in the declines of aging could give us a profoundly effective and efficient means to prevent, postpone, or reduce the impact of diseases that threaten healthy lives. However, the great majority of U.S. federal medical research funds goes to the study of chronic diseases in isolation from each other and largely divorced from the underlying aging processes that lead to them all.
As American taxpayers, we are already supporting medical research through the National Institutes of Health. The NIH is the envy of the world, and Congress allocates over $30 billion a year to the effort. Both by history and by habit, most of our national investment in medical research is aimed at research that is specific to individual diseases. What is driving all of these diseases that we're seeing in an aging society is the same damage taking place in our aging bodies. In order to make the greatest progress that we need to make, we need to get those scientists out of their silos. We need to foster more collaboration, more sharing of information, setting common goals, having them pursue the goal of healthier aging for our population across the board. It is an achievable goal, and it's one that could be the ultimate legacy of this generation.
But there is evidence that priorities are beginning to change.
3 or 4 years ago, I started a group at the NIH, it's a trans-NIH group called Geroscience. So that's the science that addresses the intersection between basic biology of aging and why does it become a risk for diseases. There was a lot of enthusiasm, so 20 different institute directors joined. So basically, we're trying to do some work within the NIH to try to raise consciousness in other institutes about the importance of aging for their interests.
What if science succeeds in resetting the aging clock in each of us, so that it takes 70 or even 80 years to reach age 60 in body and mind? What would that kind of future look like? A future of not just a long lifespan, but a long health span.
My vision for healthy aging is my grandmother. She lived independently in her house for 72 years. She had to go into assisted living 6 months before she died. She was active in her bowling league until her mid-90s. She drove a car until her mid-90s. She was mentally sound up until 2 days before she died. Aging research has the potential to develop strategies to help people have that kind of a life where they're still active and happy and engaged in their 90s. And I think if we could achieve that goal, that would be a major victory on all fronts.
There's no question that health span, the extension of a healthy lifespan, pays economic dividends that would extend for generations. I mean, we've estimated in our own research that a minor deceleration in the rate of aging, very small change for the US would add over $7 trillion to the national economy over the next couple of decades. And we actually think that's an underestimate. We think that it would actually be significantly larger. So the benefits in terms of economic value and in terms of personal value, just how you enjoy your life is tremendous. We all know this personally. And imagine this at a population level. not just applying to an individual, but to over 300 million people.
Some of our brightest and most dedicated research scientists are working on ways to unravel the secrets of aging, so we might finally realize our collective and ancient wish for more years of quality life.
We're talking about a fundamental game changer in the world of public health that will change the way in which we live our lives. And that's the way I see a successful intervention to slow the biological process of aging. And an intervention that slows aging, if it occurs in this century, and I think it will occur in the lifetimes of most people alive today, will be, in my view, the most important medical discovery in history.
The potential of aging research is not to make us older for a longer time. We want to slow the hands of time so that we might enjoy more years of healthy, vigorous life. Why shouldn't this be our next great national priority?
I love working with older people as a geriatrician, but I am growing maybe a little bit tired of trying to prescribe better wheelchairs, better walkers, ways of preventing falls, ways of preventing incontinence, ways of preventing age-related diseases. I'd much rather have a way, and so would all my clinical geriatrics colleagues, have a way where we can stop those things from even becoming an issue in the first place.
It can happen with your help. To learn more and get involved, visit healthspancampaign.org.
So we saw the last 7 minutes of that video.
Burden are members of their families. The majority.
We saw the last 7 minutes in exchange for the questions, which I think we're going to have time later.
Yeah, we'll have time at the end of the afternoon for questions for Jay and for all of the panelists. But for now, we have time for lunch.
And lunch will be in our auditorium, and staff members will help direct you there.
And let's have some applause for Jay for a very exciting presentation.